I was looking the other day. We had Senpai did a wonderful chat with a lot of our students. I know a lot of you guys were there for our teen and adult chat. And after hearing a lot of the feedback and a lot of the different things that people were talking about, it reminded me of some times previous in our history and made me think of something that I thought would be beneficial to everybody. And a lot of times we spend time talking about history of the martial arts and where it came from, and talk about maybe the history of our organization and where it came from. But the one thing that we don't really spend too much time talking about is where we came from as a school. And, you know, being someone that kind of lived through that, I don't always think of that as something, it doesn't come to my mind in the forefront as something to share and to tell that story. But the other night, it seemed like it would be a good time to share some of those things because I felt like it's not really about dates and years and names really like some of your other histories might be, but I think it might serve as a story of inspiration as we go through a unique time in our current history. A lot of the time we spent on Thursday night was trying to look at things from a different perspective, and a lot of our adults and teens alike jumped in and gave different perspectives on their lives right now, on the future, and we got some different looks at how we can look at those things. And so that's why our story came to mind because a lot of times things happen that you don't expect, things happen that weren't planned, things happen that weren't a part of the cookie cutter plan that you set out for yourself. But then a lot of times those things actually develop into something greater than you could have ever thought possible. And when I think about our school and where it's gone and where it's headed and where it's going, those words ring very true to me. And I think really to go back to the beginning on this for everybody would be to take it back to where Senpai and I kind of got started with this whole thing. And I'll tell you, it's easy to sit and look at what we have right now and think about that. But really, we were just like any other kids that really enjoyed two really important things back at the time. In the early '80s, it was the Karate Kid. I mean, that was what it was all about. My dad loved the Karate Kid, therefore I loved the Karate Kid. I loved watching those movies, and I thought they were the best thing in the whole world. To the point where I had this little karate sweatsuit that I wore around the house, flying around, jumping, kicking, doing things. And Senpai and I really enjoyed that growing up. And then as we moved into the late '80s into the '90s, we loved the Ninja Turtles. And my goal in life was to become a Ninja Turtle. And as you know, I still haven't turned green yet, but I'm working on it. It's a never-ending process, but we're working on it. And I mean, that was like the reason why we got started with this whole thing. And I bet I see a lot of my adults kind of smiling because I think they remember some of those times. And it's funny, you're getting old when you've seen something that you enjoy go through different reboots a couple times over. So I don't know, we've seen 3 or 4 incarnations of Ninja Turtles at this point, but I was there for the first one. And I know a lot of you were too. And that was and the first incarnation of Ninja Turtles was a big deal. And I mentioned that because that was really inspirational for us. That was something that really got us jump started in this journey of martial arts. And then we look at where we are today. And I thank Daniel San, and I thank Leonardo, Donatello, Michelangelo, and Raphael. If it wasn't for them, I don't think we'd all be sitting here tonight. So thanks, guys. I appreciate that. But that was it, right? And so Senpai and I we're crazy. We're flying around the house, acting like Ninja Turtles and Mr. Miyagi and Daniel San, and I guess eventually Power Rangers came into that as well. But our parents just thought it was a phase we were going through. They thought we were nuts and crazy, which we were, and it took years and years and years for them to eventually realize that this wasn't going away, that we really were crazy, and we really did want to do this martial art thing. And so growing up, it took a couple of different things. It took going to baseball and going to scouts and doing some other things for our parents to realize that, number one, we weren't very athletic, couldn't do any of that stuff. So that was out the window. And number two, that we really didn't have an interest in any of these other things. And we were just doing it just to try it. And that was about it. But our true passion lied in martial arts. And so the next step in this journey for us was at the time, as we got a little bit older, our older brother, senpai, and mine, older brother, he had a really good friend that actually was teaching martial arts at the time. His friend, I think, was in high school, and he was actually teaching at a local school. So we're like, hey, mom, dad, please let us do this. And by this point in time, they had realized these kids aren't going to stop. We have to let them do this. So we did. And some of you are probably familiar with Batoku Karate Dojo, one of our organization's schools. And the head sensei there is Sensei John Wasselina. Well, he and my brother actually grew up together as friends, and he was actually how I got started in the martial arts. He and Senpai as well. He actually taught our very first class. So Senpai and I started one summer on the very same day, and Sensei Wasselina, who wasn't Sensei Wasselina yet, but he was one of the instructors back in the day, and he taught our very first class at a local school that we had started at, and it was one of the first schools in Michigan to have our organization affiliation back at that time, and a lot of different instructors had come through the school. Some of you at our tournaments have seen Mr. Ken Worm. He's one of our senior judges at the tournaments, and he was one of the instructors at that time. And those two kind of came up in the same time frame and taught together. And that's how we got started. That was how this journey began. And just like anybody else in the martial arts, we continued through and started working towards black belt and set that goal for ourselves. And eventually, mom and dad realized that this wasn't going to stop. This was going to continue. And so we became, members of Black Belt Club, just like many of you guys have done. And, started kind of fulfilling that goal and that journey. And we got to a point where we met some interesting people along the way, made some great friends. And some of these friends are people that you may know, or at least have heard of in our school to this day. And one of my very good friends is, of course, Mr. Chris Brown, who I think is on the chat tonight. I saw him log in. I think he's in here somewhere. Mr. Brown, you out there? Oh, there he is. Yeah, I see him. Hey, Mr. Brown, good to see you. Thanks for being here tonight.
Absolutely, Sensei.
What's that?
I said absolutely, Sensei.
Oh, good to have you. Good to have you. You didn't know I was going to talk about you tonight, did you?
No.
First time he was able to be on with us. He's been busy. He's a school teacher, for those of you that don't know. So he's been really busy trying to set up new learning for the school and for his students, et cetera, et cetera. So good to see you, Mr. Brown. And but he was one of those great friends we met in that journey. Another one who's actually joining us on this chat tonight is Sensei Khalil from the dojo. Good to see you, Sensei Khalil. And he was another person that came up in class with us as we were coming up the ranks. A lot of you have met Dr. Jeffrey Gannett, and he was another one. Actually, he and Sensei Khalil started a few months before we did. Mr. Brown started shortly thereafter, and so we all came up together. And then after a couple years of being involved, Sensei Davis and I crossed paths. And for those of you that don't know, Sensei John Davis from Dynamic Martial Arts and myself are best friends and have been friends for 25 years or so now, at least, probably longer than that. I'm starting to lose track of all the time. And so just like you guys have people in your class that you came up with and that you've bonded with, we had that same thing. And I mentioned that tonight because when things change and things happen, it really helps you figure out who some of those friends and people are in your life that are going to make a big difference and they're going to stick by you. And continuing on, as we got closer to black belt, I guess you could say there was like the next generation of people that were coming in behind us. One of them is on the meeting tonight. Sensei Slicker is out there. I see him over there with Miss Ambrosio. Sensei Slicker, glad you're here tonight. He was another one that was right behind us in that journey, so to speak. And Hancho Rissman was right there with him as well. Those two more or less came up kind of in the same generation, if you will. And I'm sure I'm missing a few people in there, but I think I covered some of the major players that you guys would recognize. There's a lot of players in there, of course, but those are some of the major players that you would recognize. And then, what had happened was a lot of us earned, and of course, well, we all did. We all achieved black belt, and for us, that was in the late '90s. That myself and Sensei Davis and Sensei Khalil and of course Senpai and Dr. Ganay, we all achieved black belt actually at the same time on the same day. And then behind us were again people like Sensei Slicker and Hancho and so on and so forth. And it was shortly after achieving black belt that a lot of us began teaching. And so by that point I was in high school, and so I came up through high school teaching martial arts. And again, at this point, I was just having fun. I was just like a lot of you that might be teenagers. They have a part-time job. A lot of you guys are working really hard right now, working at the different restaurants and things, doing carryouts, especially because that's all they're doing right now. And we did that too. We were working at restaurants. We were teaching martial arts. We were teaching part-time and going to school and doing homework and juggling all that and et cetera, et cetera. And myself and Sensei Davis did that. And it was right around that time when we started teaching. Some of you remember Sensei Gaddis. For those of you that don't know, Sensei Gaddis is a student of our school that now has his own school in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He's been running that for a number of years now. He worked for us as an instructor for a number of years. But it was in those late 90s that he had actually began and started training alongside of us. And he had done some martial arts before. He moved around the country quite a bit growing up. He'd done some martial arts prior to our organization, but he joined us and quickly moved through the ranks because of his experience. And eventually, as we kind of get to the high point in our I guess you could say our coming up experience, we got to a point where Sensei Davis and I were both working at a school. We were teaching side by side. By that point, people like Sensei Wasseline and Mr. Worm, they had moved on. They were no longer teaching at the school. They moved into some other things for a while. And it got to the point where, Sensei Davis and I were I guess you could say the senior more instructors coming up the ranks of teaching. And we're going to college at this point. We worked through high school. And the two of us, at least I could say, came to the point where we had decided this might be something we want to pursue. We were going to school and we thought that, after college and so on and so forth, that it'd be something that we would want to pursue, perhaps having a school or a couple schools or what have you, and teaching and doing this on a professional level full time. And right along those same times, Dr. Ganay was an instructor. He was an instructor that came up alongside of us. Is kind of the next tier down, and then Sensei Gaddis was a part of that staff. And at that time, I believe Sensei Slicker and Senpai Sensei Khalil and Senpai Romanelli, they were in instructor training and teaching at YMCA's and doing different satellite programs, things like that. And so we kind of gotten to this point where we were all working towards some goals. We were all learning how to become instructors. And I kind of want to give you some background on that so you can kind of see our journey. But this is where the story gets interesting. And you see what happened was, and before I say what happened, this was in no way a reflection on the staff, and by no way a reflection on the students. We were at a school at the time that had moved locations a couple times. It had grown. At one point, there were a couple different schools. But at this particular time, we're getting into the early 2000s now. The school had condensed itself into one large location, and I would say probably catered to about 200 to 300 students at the time, probably closer to 300, as I recall. And suddenly, due to unfortunate business practices, the school was forced to close. And it was an interesting situation because no one knew that this was going to happen. And it was, I'll spare you the boring details, but it was almost like we went to bed one night and woke up the next morning and everything had changed. Does any of this sound familiar? It was like we went to bed one night, woke up the next morning, and suddenly like the whole world had changed. And it was an interesting time because we had a lot of students that were very interested in continuing their martial arts. And we had a lot of instructors, myself included, that were very interested in teaching martial arts. But as I told you, the plan was we wanted to finish college, I don't know, maybe go buy a house, do something. We had all these things planned out, and it was all according to the school that we were at and what was good, what was supposed to happen. And then, like that, it all changed. And man, I'll tell you, looking back on that now, it was an interesting time because literally everybody had no place to go. And this was over the summer. I think this happened around June time. And so for about a month, we were in this limbo time. And by the way, it was around this. It was just prior to this that people that you guys know really well, like Mr. Coast, had started training about a couple years before this had transpired. So she was there. There's a lot of our, you would say, alumni students that have been around the whole time that were a part of that time in history, and so they're reliving this with me tonight. But a lot of people, I think of Cody Podlaskowski as an example, as someone who was there for that. Some of you might know Austin Gagne, Shane Theed were a part of that. And I'm of course I'm drawing blanks now, but a lot of our students that have been around for longer than 20 years, as the dojo's been around longer than 20 years, had kind of lived through that. And so here's what happens. Long story short, is now we have instructors that don't have a place to teach, and so it results in a scramble. And we began teaching classes over at Metro Beach for the black belts. We began classes at a local athletic club to have a place to train and to do things. And, we couldn't do everything because we didn't have the facilities that we once had at our disposal, but we were able to do something. And it reminds me of something that I was told one time. Let's say there's 1,000 techniques in martial arts, and you can only do 900. Well, 900 is still pretty darn good. Who cares about the other 100? If you can still do 900, that's still pretty darn good. And that's kind of the situation we were in. We couldn't do 100%, but we could do something close to that. And so, at the time, there was a good chunk of students that had kind of followed us. We went, Senpai jumped right on board at that point. He went from becoming a YMCA, part-time instructor / helper to, senior instructor right alongside. I mean, talk about on-the-job training, and he just jumped in and bless his heart for that. And Mrs. Romanelli too jumped in to help us behind the scenes, and that's kind of how this whole thing got started. And we spent the summer kind of figuring out what we were going to do. And I took about a whole total of 2 weeks and decided, hey, is this something we really want to keep doing? Is this really something we want to do? Again, I was going to school at the time, and I could have pursued anything at the time. And but I said, no, I want to do this. And a lot of people were looking to us to create something and to do something. So we said, okay, let's do it. Let's make it happen. And so we decided we were going to found Romanelli's International Martial Arts. So this is June. We're now into July. We're teaching classes at the beach. We're teaching classes at the local athletic club. We make this decision, we're going to do this. And so, we start looking for buildings, start finding facilities, et cetera, and going through that whole process. And by September, we had found at least a third of the building that you come to for your classes. And by January, that school opened. And I say that because, man, it just looks so familiar to me right now. We see a situation where a lot of things have popped up we didn't expect. And I was listening to our Uh, Teenagers talk about graduation this year. Our our students talk about not finishing the school year the way they had planned. And, that does happen sometimes. It does happen sometimes. I had wanted to teach martial arts. Senpai and I had both wanted to do that. A lot of people, I know Sensei Slicker had that as a goal of his, but we didn't expect it to go the way that it went. But I wouldn't change a day of that process either, because it was a tremendous learning opportunity. And by January of 2003, Senpai's birthday, in fact, we had ourselves a dojo. Not only did we have a dojo, but we had a dojo with somewhere between, I'd say 40 to 70 students that were not brand new students, that were students that were looking for a home. And I was so happy that we were able to provide that for them. And the best part of that is so many of those people are still with us to this day, almost 20 years later. And so that tells me that it was worth it. Not only are they with us today, but some of them even have their own schools. Some of them are making their living teaching martial arts. People like Sensei Slicker, Sensei Gaddis. Sensei Khalil trained at the school with us for a time when we first opened the school until he was able to find a place to train. And we saw people like Hancho become instructors. We saw people like Mr. Coast become instructors eventually. All because of something that wasn't planned. All because of something that happened more or less by accident. So my mind drifts a lot, and I think about, man, what if one thing had been different, And so we had gone from not knowing where to go to having a school. By the end of the first year, by the end of 2003, we had built the school to a point where we needed more help. We needed more teachers. And then Sensei Gaddis actually started working with us as an instructor. And he did that for a couple years. And then he had actually went away to school for a couple years. And then Sensei Slicker came on board. He was running the YMCA programs for us. He and Mr. Brown were doing that for a while. And then eventually Sensei Slicker came on as more of a permanent instructor. And then eventually we needed more help again, and Sensei Gaddis was back. And so we said, all right, well, hey, let's get Sensei Gaddis back in the mix. So he came back. He decided that he was interested again, and we decided we were interested in having him again. So we, he came back with us. A lot of you that have been with us for a while remember those times. And then it got to a point, of course, where in the middle of this, the school was growing, and we had to expand our school and take over the building that now is right next door to Lamia, and we expanded our school. That was at the end of 2006, beginning of 2007, and it was right around that time Miss Ambrosio started. I know some of you probably wonder where Miss Ambrosio is going to come into this. Hi, Miss Ambrosio. She's hanging out with us tonight. And that was around the time that she got started, right? We were doing that first expansion. And of course, as a lot of you know, things progressed from there. We're now in the 2007 area. So we're what is that now? 13 years ago still? Wow. Can't believe that. But anyway, so now things are continuing to progress. And now, fast forward a couple years, and now we think, hey, we need some part-time, some junior instructors to jump on board with us. That was the time when you saw Mr. Coast become an instructor with us on our staff, and Mr. Cameron follows shortly thereafter. A lot of you probably remember Mr. Cameron was one of our great instructors at that time, did a wonderful job, and he's since moved on to some other things, but we still love Mr. Cameron, of course. And it's just I see all these different people go through all these different stages in their lives and development, and I just keep thinking back to what if. What if the unplanned hadn't happened? What if something had gone different, And anyway, we keep on going. Eventually it rolls around to about 2010, 2011-ish, beginning of that year. And we decide, hey, we need some more room. We need some more space. We got more to do. And so then as you guys have probably noticed, we busted a hole in the wall and made another piece of our school. And it was right around that same time that Sensei Slicker was starting to establish his school. And so he'd been working on that. So he was working with us part-time while he was establishing that. And I mention all that because, that is another great positive thing that came out of some of these other things that had happened years ago. And as Sensei Slicker started to phase out, we phased in Hancho. As I know you guys are all super familiar with him. He'd been training with us for years and years and years, and pursued some other things for a time. And by this point, he was back in action, and he was working elsewhere. And was like, Sensei, I'd like to do this. And I'm like, oh, well, news to me. I didn't know that. I'm like, well, great. Your timing couldn't be better. And so just by some stroke of timing, once again, by some stroke of timing, we started to wave and wish Sensei Slicker well. And we started to give Sensei Gaddis the bon voyage as he moved to Pennsylvania to get the ball rolling for his school. We welcomed Hancho on stage, or on staff rather, with us. And we started to develop the people that we had at that point as instructors. And if you fast forward a little bit longer, and Sensei Slicker, of course, makes his full transition into his school, Traditional Karate Dojo, which has been operating now. How many years is it now, Sensei Slicker? I've lost track. Would you mind jumping in for us real quick?
Let's see. Well, we opened up in 2012. So
how many years is that? You do the math.
8 years.
That was 8 years ago. All the stuff we just talked about was 8 years ago. I can't believe it. It feels like it was just yesterday, And so congratulations on 8 years. That's awesome. Good for you. That's fantastic. And again, shortly thereafter, Sensei Gaddis went to Pennsylvania, and he spent some time getting things in order before he opened his school. But I'd say he's got to be getting, Sensei Slicker, what do you think? Is it probably about 5 years or so for him going on that, right?
Yeah, that sounds about right. 5 years.
Yeah, give or take. Yeah, absolutely. I'd have to do some more research to know the exact number, but yeah. And so here we are. And then as they made those transitions, it opened up some space, and that's when we lashed on to Miss Ambrosio and made her an official part of the team. And she was just one that was out there with so much energy as an assistant. And we just, we kept trying to tell her to go home, and she just wouldn't go home. And she just kept coming in and helping out and doing things. Mr. Brown looked at me at one point. He was at that point in the middle of a lot of that. I think I mentioned this, but if I did, Mr. Brown had jumped in to help us with a lot of our adult classes at the time, and was a great asset to that as we started to bring our junior instructors up to a new level. I never forget, Mr. Brown looked at me and said, "You got to do something with her. You look at that. She's outstanding." I'll never forget that. And she was out there leading some of the junior black belts, and I'm like, "Yeah, I guess we'll do something," And so I'll never forget it. We were at one of the holiday banquets, and it was the time when we were dancing and all that stuff. Everybody was socializing. I grabbed Miss Ambrosio for a second. I took her out the hallway. I said, after the holiday, why don't you just show up for work in January? And she looked at me like I had two heads, like I was crazy. And I said, yeah, you just come in for work, and we'll go over the details later. And of course, then she jumped up and down a couple times, ran on the dance floor, and I think danced her night away after that. So she was pretty excited. And so that kind of brings us to where we almost are, I guess, with the current staff and the current people that we have, and kind of how we got to where we are. And I look back at that now, and I think, what if almost 20 years ago that school hadn't shut down and that situation hadn't happened? Would we have even opened our school? It definitely wouldn't have happened in the timeline that it did. It definitely wouldn't have been the same group of people that it was. That could only work out when you have what you have. And for me, as I go through this moment, this opportunity, that's a real inspirational thing. because I think back to that time. I think back to the feelings of uncertainty, of having students that were looking my way thinking, Sensei, what are we going to do? Just as a lot of us are looking at our government right now, asking those same questions, or our parents, our instructors, our leaders, and the answers aren't always right there in front of you. I'll never forget, back at that time, we had, just like we do right now, a group of black belt candidates that were literally in the middle of black belt preparation. Back at that time, the exam process started in June and then finished up with the September graduation. And so we had to create some different ways of making that happen. I'll never forget, I reached out to, the school that Sensei Burtney and our organization now runs, College of Martial Arts, was originally founded by Sensei Kelly Combs, good friend of mine. And so I reached out to him at that time. That was the only school in Michigan that was open. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that. It was not the only school, but it was the closest school to where we were at that was open during that time. I reached out to him. I said, hey, I'd love to run some black belt preparation classes. Can I run them at your school during times when you don't have classes going on? He was kind enough to extend that opportunity to us without any, free of charge, no obligation whatsoever. And I'm so thankful for that. And because if it wasn't for just some giving spirits and some people that were out there to help and to guide the way and to help us through that time, we wouldn't have been able to accomplish that. Fast forward to September of that year, and we promoted nearly 50 black belts that year. And we were able to complete the black belt exam process for those students. They were able to get promoted. We had several schools that came together for a large graduation ceremony. And for me, that was one of the greatest successes that I had ever accomplished, especially back at that time. And notice that it had nothing to do with me. It wasn't my graduation. It was theirs. But it was so cool to see people come together when something not so great happens, and to see people come together to help each other to make something really beneficial come out of it. Is this sounding familiar at all? It sounds really familiar to me. It sounds really familiar to me. And sorry, I'm just making sure that everything's working. And the reason that it worked was because of the people. It was because of the support that we had, not only back at that time, but the support that we've had all the way through this journey, and the lessons that we learned. I think back to when we first opened that school, and again, it wasn't planned. So guess what? I didn't have any money. I didn't have anything prepped for that, to open a school, to open a business. I didn't have anything. I was working, we're working through my way through college at the time. I had no plan for that as of yet. My goal was to finish college, then put that plan together. Senpai and mine, our parents were kind enough to step up and to help us through that, and to loan us a big part of what we needed to get things started back at that time. Thank goodness for them. And of course, I'm happy to say we were able to pay that back pretty quickly. And of course, we started teaching at the athletic club. We started, putting things in order. And within a 6-month time, we managed to have a school and to have something concrete. And another couple of names that come to mind. A lot of you know Mr. Kyle Fall. He was with us during that time. He was, I'll never forget, he was an orange belt back at that time. Yellow belt, orange belt during that time. Samantha Henry, formerly known as Samantha Orr, was with us during that time. And Don Orr, her dad and that whole family was with us at that time. And I hear that some of them are even with us on the chat tonight. Kyle Fall, you with us?
Yeah, I'm just kidding.
He's trying to figure out how to. There you go. You got it.
Good.
You there?
Yes.
So Kyle, Mr. Fall, you were just a little martial arts fetus back at that time, but Do you remember going through any of that at all?
Yeah, it was weird. The school, we just couldn't go at one point, and then a couple months went by, and then I heard the new school was opening, the dojo. So now I'm there at RIMA.
Yeah, we tried to get rid of you and everything. You just wouldn't leave. Absolutely. And I heard Samantha Henry was on here somewhere. Is that true?
That is true.
Oh, look at that. Look at that. How's it going?
Good.
So how long have you been on? You been on the whole time?
Yeah, I've been trying to figure the Zoom thing out. So you probably saw me leave a couple of times because I was trying to figure it out.
Excellent. Yeah, you joined the club. We're all trying to figure it out. So.
And I was eating, so I didn't want to show my face stuffing food in myself. So.
I understand. I finished eating right before we started. So. But I know you were pretty young back at that time when we were making some of those transitions. But you remember some of that stuff?
Oh yeah, I remember the whole timeline.
Yeah. So you ever think about how things would have been different if just one thing had been different, if something had changed, how life would be a little different for you?
Yeah, honestly, as you were telling the story, I don't know if I would have kept going with everything. I'm glad the way things turned out, honestly.
Yeah.
From the start of it to the racquetball courts to being outside and then to the dojo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For those of you that don't know, Samantha or slash Henry was when she started, I'll never forget, she wouldn't talk to anybody.
Nope.
And now we just have a hard time getting her to stop talking. So
Yes.
and I mean that in the best possible way. But I bring that up because I never forget, we were at your wedding earlier this past year, and your dad and I were talking, and we were talking about how how he felt martial arts was such an important thing for you to get to where you were, as far as just being able to set goals for yourself, accomplish them, interact with others, and make just the simple things like making friends and doing all that. And not to put you on the spot, but do you have anything to say about any of that, or how do you feel about that?
No, I definitely think martial arts has impacted my life for the greater good. That's for sure. Like you said, I was so shy, and now you can't, get me to stop talking. So, no, it definitely, I respect myself more. I respect others more. A lot of the things that you've taught me over the years, and, all of the instructors, giving me myself more confidence and just presenting myself in the best way possible. I think that all came from that. And you guys shaped me in a good, positive way. So I appreciate all of the lessons that you guys have taught me over the years. I really do. And I wouldn't be who I am if it wasn't for, you guys. You guys are my family. So, and I know I haven't been around lately, but so yeah, I would say definitely, especially not to just put the women on spot, but I kid you not, if I ever have children down in the, the near future, and if I have a girl, she's going in karate, because it teaches you so much as a woman and to other people. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, one quick question. What if you have a boy?
They're still going in it.
Oh, okay. I was just making sure. All right. Well,
yeah. Because they have to respect people too. So, and I want him to be kind and know discipline and all of that. So yeah.
Awesome.
He's definitely going in it. All of them are going in it.
I look forward to that. And you bring up a really good point. We fast forward from 2002 when things broke apart, and then 2003 when they came back together and started to grow. And now there's a time where I could walk out into a Little Dragons class and I could teach Sensei Slicker's daughter. I could teach Sensei Gaddis's nephew. I could teach Mrs. Wicker's grandchildren. Mind you, I used to teach that, well, of course, I still teach her and used to teach her children. We could walk out and teach Joseph Engelbrink again after all the years, and then his son to go alongside, and then I could mention some other names that might not be as familiar to some of you, but Dr. Ganay's children I could teach in a class. And so it's so cool to see this become generational. And I look forward to the future generations. And the good news is a lot of the students keep getting older and having kids, and I just stay exactly the same. So it works out really well overall. I kind of enjoyed that part of it. So, but let's see here. Who else do we have on here? Mr. Coast, I hear you're with us. Are you out there?
I am.
Oh, there. And then there was a voice. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. I know that. I think you jumped on just kind of recently here, but we were talking about kind of the history of our school and how it came to be, and how we started out and literally at one school and then ended up founding our school based on the closing of another a little bit. You know, you were pretty young back at that time too, but you know, have you ever thought about just some of that time and what would have happened had things gone differently for you? Have you ever given that any
thought? Yes and no.
Okay.
I would say I'm happy that I stuck with it.
Mhm. Yeah.
Because it's definitely a journey where you get to meet a lot of people
Mhm.
who mean a lot to you.
Sure. And, you know, I guess maybe a different question for you would be, do you have any idea what you'd be doing right now if you hadn't stuck with it? I mean, you were I don't know, 6, 7, 8 years old, whatever you know, well, well, not when she started, but
My
your
mom
mom's
will
arguing
correct
with
you
me
on
right now, exactly. But in any case, I'm talking about, you know, when one school shuts down and another one opens, it's definitely a point in time where people could just stop and never continued that. And so we had a good cluster of students that maintained through all that, and that's why a lot of them are still here, because they're the diehards, right? So, Mr.
Yep.
Coase, you're definitely one of those. We try to get rid of you. You haven't left yet. So, which I'm just kidding, obviously. But do you have any idea where you'd be right now, given that this has been such a long, you know, it's been so many years now? I mean, you have any idea what you'd be doing if you weren't still doing martial arts? I mean, given that it's your career, it's what you do every day.
Honestly, no. I would say, if anything, I'd probably be like, I don't know, a volleyball coach or something physical. I definitely would not be sitting behind a desk. And that's why I enjoy my job so much.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for jumping in. Sorry to put you on the spot right away.
No, you're all right.
But I'm going to blame it on Samantha Henry. So.
Thanks, Sam.
Yeah, you guys are like, you know,
No
sisters in
problem.
the arts. I couldn't talk to one without the other. So.
Two peas in a pod.
Hey,
Oh, yeah.
Bob Laskowski, you're out there. What could you offer us on the subject? Oh, is he gone?
I think you left.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Well, we'll have to hear from him at another time. He has a unique story just because he was with us for a long time and then had to stop for a little bit and in recent years came back and he's been through a little bit of a journey, and I'm sure he'd have some interesting things to share with us there, but we'll have to hear from him another time. But Senpai, how are you?
I'm great, Sensei. My ears
Hey,
are
there
burning.
we go. I saw you out there. We hit some different things tonight. I'm sure I gave people some insight into some things that they hadn't been privy to in the past for the most part. Any thoughts on your end of that? I mean, I know that I mentioned a lot of things that obviously you and I were going through side by side, but you always tend to have a left-handed view on things. So, I mean, what would you add to that? And I think you probably know why I brought some of that up tonight based on what we went through on Thursday. Do you have anything to add to that?
Well, as more and more time goes by, you realize that history repeats itself in some ways, and you can learn from the past. Hopefully, this experience we're all working through right now is something that we can take with us for a long, long time and make sure the world stays safer and healthier for the future. I just enjoyed looking around the chat room here and seeing some of the faces that have been around for all those years. I know Don Orr's out there. He probably doesn't want to say anything, but I'm going to put him on the spot in a minute. I'd like to hear his take on things because he always has a good level-headed approach to things. And, I know Cassidy, I think you came from our YMCA program all those years ago, and I'd like to hear some of your thoughts on it. And I look forward to the future. I know Tim Upton, he's out there somewhere, and he bounced around in some training for a long time, and he's been around a long time as well, even if he won't tell anybody that. But it's a constant evolving family that is always growing and changing, and that's a fascinating thing. Just I talked to Mark Alashevsky a couple weeks ago, and he said, "Senpai, I just miss everybody." And I just thought that was really cool.
Absolutely. And we miss everybody too. There's no doubt about it. How, what do you think, Senpai? Who would be a good person to start with? You had a nice little list there. I enjoyed that. So
Oh yeah.
you have a little bit better view of everybody than I do. What do you think? Where would be a good place to start?
Well, you got to go with Don Orr first. He's always a good one.
Don, you out there?
I'm just going to jump.
Is it working?
It is, Don. I can hear you.
Hey,
Dad, you got it to work.
I'm technologically smart.
How's it going, Don?
It's going good. How about you?
Good. I know that we've waved a lot back and forth on Zoom. We haven't had a chance to catch up in a spell. And I know that I was bringing up just some things in the past that we all kind of went through as our school kind of got to where it is today, and just to put some things in perspective. You weren't even a student at that time. You were a parent at that time, and
Right.
a lot of that from that side. You've had a chance to see your family, your kids go through this process, and then of course yourself go through it. And now you've been a student with us for it's over 15 years now yourself. What give some perspective on that if you wouldn't mind. What are your thoughts on all that stuff?
Well, I think martial arts is awesome. I mean, especially if you have kids. Like from my perspective, when we first started, it was both my kids in there. And like you said, Samantha was a really shy kid. And obviously she's not shy anymore. So, and I attribute that to karate. And she's able to go in her job, talk in front of people, put on seminars. I would have never thought she'd ever be able to do anything like that. I mean, I can't do that. She does really well at it. And I blame that all on karate. I think it's an awesome thing. I would put my kids in. If I'd have known the way it is now, I would have did it when I was a kid.
Sure. Well, I think I can speak for Senpai and myself when I say that we're very glad you did that, and we're happy to have you here on the journey. And I would imagine at some point you'll be kicking some grandkids into our classes at some point. We won't rush it, but just just saying.
You got to click her back on.
Yeah. I'm not looking for any input on that, but I know that it's only a matter of time, I'm sure. So
I'm gonna have to talk to her husband.
Yeah. Well, again, I think we'll stop there for now. But thank you for sharing. I appreciate it.
You're
Senpai,
welcome.
what do you think? Who would be another good person? You know, and just so you know, Senpai, Mr. Brown is with us too, and I know that I mentioned him, and I have yet to
Oh, yeah.
call on him too much yet. What do you think?
We'll save Mr. Brown for a minute there. I
agree.
think Cassidy would be nice to hear from, and maybe then Mr. Brown.
Sure.
Maybe Sensei Flicker as well.
Sure. I put Sensei Slick under the bus a little bit, but I'd love to hear from him some more. So, what do you think, Cassidy? You were a student that just started a local YMCA, and I mean, what did you think that this was something? Did you think you'd be sitting here right now with us in your 20s on a Zoom chat when you started as a little kid?
No, I had no idea. I had no idea I would even leave the Y, and then I just remember Sensei Slicker was my first teacher, and he noticed that there's a couple students that were like really consistent with their classes, I think, and were really like into it, and so they told us about the dojo, and then after that we just started going, to Romanelli's, and I think the rest was not history, I guess, because I'm still here, but but yeah, I never would have imagined this happening, and then for you guys to even be doing these Zoom classes right now, and like all the videos and stuff is just, I think, phenomenal. Like, it would have been so easy for you guys to just be like, okay, we'll see you guys in a month, we'll pick back up, like, when everything's back to normal.
Mm-hmm.
But no, you're going the extra mile for us, and I really appreciate that. And I think that's one of the reasons I've been here for so long too.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, and I appreciate that. Thank you. One of the things that as I mentioned some comments earlier, is when we had to create the school, we were fortunate enough to have some people there to help us with that. It did not work out the way that we had anticipated. We didn't have all the help that we thought we were going to have, to be truthful. And I don't take away from anybody who was there, because we truly appreciated that. But it was not done in the way that we anticipated, and so we had to learn a lot really quick, and we had to move pretty fast and learn some things pretty quickly. And for me, I never wanted to ever be in that position again, or see somebody else be in that position. And so I think one of the greatest assets of going through something like that is learning. And then when a situation presents itself, now, even though you didn't see it coming per se, have a different perspective on how to handle it. And in the back of your mind, know that it can be handled. And we could still do a lot of things. We could still make a lot of things occur and transpire. So I guess what I'm saying is, been there, done that, we're fine, right? And so next, right? So
Next.
we appreciate your support, Cassidy. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Absolutely. Senpai, what do you think?
Well, I'm sure Mr. Brown's about ready to explode if we don't let him go for a few minutes here. So.
Yeah, and we only got a few minutes left. I mean, we got to make sure we leave enough time for Sensei Slicker. So, all right, Mr. Brown, what do you think? What do you have any thoughts? And I know that you haven't been able to be with us in a few weeks because of everything you've been swamped with, and I got your message right before I started saying you're going to be on the chat, which I was excited about. Of course, you had no idea what I was going to talk about, so I'm sure this was a little different than what you expected. Any perspective on your end on a lot of what we discussed tonight?
Well, Sensei, I think you kind of hit it on the head saying, things happen, we adapt, we make the best of the situation, and everything kind of happens for a reason, and we make it positive for us. Sure. I mean, I became a school teacher because when I was in high school, I taught some of those YMCA classes at the dojo. Mm-hmm. Me not being a school teacher wouldn't have allowed me to meet the person who's going to be my wife. Without karate, I'd be down 3 groomsmen because you, Sensei, Davis, and Senpai are all standing up in our wedding. And, you look at everything that's gone on. And like you said, been there, done that.
Yeah.
This is, you made a dojo out of thin air, in my opinion, and it's as successful as it is. Virus isn't going to stop RIMA or anybody else for that matter. because we've been through worse.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we have the technology to, like you're doing this right now, to make it work.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a friend of mine said something the other day. He goes, you can't pick the cards in your hand. You just have to play the best with what you've been dealt. And we've been dealt a crappy situation, and you guys are making it work. To see all of you doing different videos and Zoom classes from all your prospective houses, you know, is it the best? Is it what we all want? No, but it's the best you can do for now, and it's going over great. I know what it's like to have to try to teach from home. It's not fun. Like Senpai said, you miss everybody.
Yeah.
You know, I used to see 600 kids a week, and now there's 2 people in my house, and that's it.
Yeah, it does. It is a shift, right? There's definitely a shift. So that's a good perspective, Mr. Brown, and thank you for your kind words on that as well. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Your support these several years at this point has never wavered, and we appreciate that more than you'll ever know. So
Several. Likewise.
yeah, absolutely. Hey, Sensei Slicker, as we finish up tonight, any perspective you could give? You know, we hit a lot of different points tonight, and I plan to, I don't know, tie it all together for everybody in a minute. But what are your thoughts?
I thoroughly enjoyed listening to you know the progression of everything there, and really made me think about those roots that you created for us, and the platforms that you've created for us to really bounce off of and go our own direction as well.
Mm-hmm.
And going kind of back to the YMCA a little bit, that was that program that I did with Mr. Brown there was as he's gonna leave. That's great. He's holding up a picture right now. That's fantastic. But that program that he brought me into, and then it was kind of funny that I think it was Mr. Brown. You might want to come in and correct me on this a little bit, but that was something that you were already kind of leading in, and you were in there. I started with you about probably like a year in or 2 years in, and I remember one year you just said, "Hey, Brandon, I can't do it anymore because of school or whatever was going on at the time." And I remember showing up there and going, I have to teach this class, and it's just me. It's kind of one of those examples of, you don't get to pick the cards that you have. They're dealt to you, and you make the best of it. And it was that year that I decided, because I obviously the program didn't fail, it actually it grew, and it kept growing after that. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of right then that I decided that this is probably something that I can do. And if it wasn't for that YMCA program, then I may not be a sensei. Mm-hmm. As of right now. So was that accurate, Mr. Brown?
I would say yes, although I don't think you're giving yourself enough credit, because it wasn't one class. It was a Little Dragons program and a karate program at 2 separate YMCAs. So you were and then you took on a third one.
Yeah.
So you went from running 4 programs at 2 different locations by yourself, and instead of saying, "Oh, this is a little much, I might have to narrow it down," you're like, "Oh, give me a third."
Yeah. Well, needless to say, it was those roots that led us to where we are right now and everything. So, yeah, it's at these troubling times right now. it's very hard sometimes to notice and see what great and what is going to come out of it. But that's the thing, is we don't know what's going to be great until we're, at a time like this where we're looking back like, hey, remember when we had that COVID thing happening and A, B, C, D, E, F, G happened, and look at us now, that type of thing. So that's something that I think we all gotta think about right now, that, we're all gonna come out of this way stronger than we started with. So.
Absolutely. Well said. And thank you.
Something funny off of that, Sensei. Well, and other people. Something the instructors, we have a little ongoing joke is, every time there's a huge storm or a snowstorm, we're always like praying for the power to go out, or a snow day. We're like, man, Sensei versus Mother Nature. Sensei always wins. And I would say right now you're still winning. So thank you.
That's funny.
Sensei wins. Remember that.
Yeah, well,
Technology involved.
And then sometimes someone just cuts the wild power line in the middle of I-75 and totally messes up the whole thing, But the bottom line is whatever happens, there's always going to be a lining in it. And before we finish, I see Mr. Zarb has his hand up, and I would like to give him the opportunity to speak because he had some really good comments for us on Thursday. I don't think he'll let us down. Alex, how are you? You're still muted. I'll unmute you. There you go. I got you now. Go ahead.
Okay. Hey, you know what? And I'm not really big on really trade or overused expressions, but for everyone involved, whether it's the kids from the last Zoom meeting, yourself, through the events that happened that got you where you're at, and the events that are going on currently that you're dealing with, here it is. It's you can let these events define who you are as a person or as a group, sure, or you push through them. And congratulations and to you guys in both arenas, when you were getting things sorted out to get the school going, and then now, I watch Nate. I mean, he lives for his time, at the karate studio, at the dojo. Mm-hmm. He really enjoys being there when he goes there, and then he knows when to turn the Zoom meeting on, and everything involved. And that's great for him, and it's great for us. And like I said, and for the students that are dealing with this COVID and losing their senior year and everything we talked about before, yeah, don't let one event define who you are for the rest of your life. Don't do that. Push through it. You guys are great examples with the martial arts studio, yourself, Senpai, everyone involved. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for those words. It's one thing for one of us to sit here and belt out a bunch of stuff. I think it's a lot more when people can add to that and give their own perspectives on it. And it gives it more credence, and we appreciate that. You've done a really good job of that this week. And so we're very happy to have you on the team.
Thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Absolutely. You're welcome. And Senpai, I have some closing things I'd like to bring up, but before I do you have anything you want to add? I don't want to deprive you of that opportunity.
I don't think we heard a lot from Miss Ambrosio tonight. So, if you'd like a couple minutes, go ahead, Miss Ambrosio.
I wouldn't, but just as the timeline portrayed, I'm in some ways kind of just a student in terms of the history of all of it. So a lot of things we got to touch on tonight. I just get to be I get to see the fruits of that labor. So just for the whole history, for all the people that came before all of us, thank you so much. And I hope that I can keep adding to what all the students are doing. And this is the best dojo ever. That's it.
That's always enjoyable, Miss Ambrosio. Thank you for that. You know, Senpai, anything to add before we finish up?
Well, Sensei, I think you deserve a lot of credit for everything you've done and organized. And, you know, without you, we wouldn't be here right now. Plain and simple.
Well, that's kind of you to say, but the only way we can accomplish any that we've ever accomplished much has been working together. So thank you for, you know, as you guys may know, I'm right-handed, and that means there's a lot of things I can't do left-handed, and that's why you got to have Senpai. You got to have a right hand and you got to have a left hand, and if they're both working good, you could accomplish some pretty great things. And you know, there's a reason why it's not called Dean Romanelli's International Martial Arts. There's a reason why it's not called Tony Romanelli's International Martial Arts. It's Romanelli's International Martial Arts, and it's because it's a family, not just of even him and I, or Mrs. Romanelli, or anybody else that's become a Romanelli in the process, but it's everybody together, you know. And I wanted to bring this up tonight, not so that anybody could get credit for it, but so that you guys, all of you, everybody that watches this later, that listens to this, can realize that you were literally born from a crisis. You are sitting here right now listening to this because of something that was considered bad that happened years ago, because of a negative that was transformed into a positive. That is literally why you are here. And I'm reminded of the words of hockey coach Herb Brooks: great moments are born from great opportunity. And so I applaud all of you for taking advantage of the opportunity. You're still here, you're still working. We are all working, and we are all benefiting, we are all growing. And we're all moving forward in this quest to black belt. This week, we had the pleasure of being hacked in the Zoom meeting during one of our Little Dragons classes. And I had a chance to talk to one of the parents, and I was just relating my apologies for the situation that happened and that we'd fixed it and so on and so forth. And she went on to mention that she thought we were doing a great job, and it was a shame that those people had done that it wasn't our fault, et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, the response to me was pretty simple, is, well, being black belt is really about working through obstacles. It's about overcoming things that get in your way. And what kind of black belts would any of us be? Whether it's us instructors, those of you out there listening that are students, what kind of black belts would any of us be if we didn't plow through the obstacles in our path and set that example? So whether it's a virus, whether it's the power goes out, whether it's the snow, whether it's somebody working in the middle of I-75 cutting a WOW internet line, and whether it's a Zoom bomber, it really doesn't matter, because you know what? Black belts just keep pushing forward. And so those of you that are working on your black belt right now, remember, this is a great moment to take advantage of. Make the most of it, make it happen. And with that said, I'll say goodnight. If anybody has any questions or any comments, they're welcome to get my attention. But thank you for listening tonight. I hope it was helpful. I hope it was inspirational, and I hope it helped to know where you come from. Thanks, guys.